In this video, we will be replacing the rear drum brakes in this 2003 Toyota Camry. To prep this vehicle, I have installed wheel chocks on the front tires. I have jacked up the rear of the vehicle so the tire is just slightly off the ground, and I have supported that with a couple jack stands. My hubcap can come off by pulling it in one area, and I can then remove my lug nuts in a star-shaped pattern. And we can remove our wheel. And with that wheel removed, we have clear access to our braking system. Taking a look from the front, we can clearly see our drum, which is basically all that you can see from the front. And from the back, there's not a whole lot to look at either. Our objective is to remove the hub and get to all of our braking components inside of this system. We can start by wiggling the hub. If it is loose, sometimes you can work that off. This one is on there really good. We can switch to a rubber mallet to see if we can dislodge it. This one is still on there really good. So if we take a look at the drum, we can see two small holes. These holes are threaded and they accept a metric 8, 1.25 by 40 is the bolt that I will be using. But first I'm going to apply just a little bit of Amsoil metal protector because these are quite rusty. This will help that bolt thread on. And we're going to alternate bolts, snugging them down to see if we can work that drum off. Then we can work that off. And then I'll use some Amsoil brake and parts cleaner just to clean everything off so I have a better vantage point of what I'm looking at. And with this all cleaned up, we are ready to begin removal of our pads and other components. And I'm going to begin with my uppermost spring. Next, we will be removing our two retainers. And if we hold the back, we can prevent the pin from spinning around. And then we want to work that parking brake cable out of that shoe assembly. So we can take a look at all of our old braking components as they were installed on the vehicle. We will be transferring a few of these components to our new brake system. And then I can lay out all of my new components, which will allow me to compare my old system with my new system and make a determination on the pieces that are missing off of the new system. First, we will remove the uppermost spring and adjuster. Next, we have a small spring on the back, which will allow us access to releasing the other components. And we can then flip that over, and that will allow us to remove the rest of that adjuster. And if we compare these side by side again, we have some parking brake levers that we need to remove. These pivot on a central point, and using a very small standard head screwdriver, we're going to try to work that free. We can then remove this arm, and if we take another close look back at that pivot point, we have a similar type of setup using a standard head screwdriver. We'll see if we can bend these apart. And then I'll come in with just a little bit bigger screwdriver, and then another one, and then I can try and work that off. Taking a look at our adjuster, we're going to go ahead and disassemble this. And we're going to clean all of these components very thoroughly using Amsoil brake and parts cleaner and a wire brush. And with those clean, we're looking pretty good. And taking a look back at my new setup, I will apply just a little bit of brake parts lubricant to that central point. And then I'm going to take that first arm off and place it on my new system. And we can add our new clip and close that clip. And then we'll take our next lever from our old system and put that on our new system and add that retaining clip. If we take a look back at the wheel assembly, we can see a couple areas where our components actually rub against that backing plate. We're going to clean these areas with a wire brush and some Amsoil brake and parts cleaner. And we'll hit the other side as well. And in these same locations, we will add just a little bit of grease. Additionally, if we take a look at the bottommost portion on both of these shoes, and we take a look towards the bottommost portion of our wheel, we can see the location where these brake pads will fit in and come in contact with a metal surface. We will be applying just a little bit of grease here as well. On my parking brake cable, I have a spring that will move back and forth. I'm going to pull the spring back and install a pair of locking pliers to hold it so I have access to the cable. And I can then work the bottommost portion of my parking brake lever around that cable and release those pliers. We're going to take a look at the back side here, and we will be installing that rear spring. And we should hear it almost snap in place. And then we can test out the components to make sure everything is moving freely. Taking a look at my adjuster, I have a fork and I have a pin. The pin needs to go through the hole that we can clearly see from the front side of our component. And on the back side, we have two corresponding prongs for our fork. Taking a look at the rest of our adjuster components, we're going to grease these up and assemble them back together. Next I have my spring. My spring has a shorter side and a longer side. I need this to be installed in the orientation that it is, just like so. Now before I get too much further, I am going to go ahead and switch out my wheel cylinders. This is not an absolute necessity if your cylinders are in good condition. Because we are putting all new components on this and it's taken apart, now is a good time to switch this out. If we take a look on the back side of our wheel assembly, we have our bleed screw location. We can see our solid brake line entering into the wheel cylinder. We can also see 2 bolts that are holding the wheel cylinder in place from the back. I'm going to begin by applying Amsoil metal protector to my brake line location as well as those bolts, and using a 10mm socket I'm going to loosen up those bolts. And with those bolts loose but not yet removed, I'm going to very gently use a 10mm tubing wrench to loosen up the hard brake line. And I always like to compare my new parts to my old parts to make sure that they look pretty much the same. We'll make sure to remove that plug before we install it. Alright, so taking a look at the back side, we have a irregular shaped hole right along the edge of the backing plate. We're going to take our spring with our long end. We're going to go in that hole and hook that around there. And then we're going to move our adjuster into place. We are ready to set this in place. We want the lower portion of our braking component locked into the tabs at the bottom of the wheel assembly. Now it is very important that the parking brake cable gets fed correctly as it enters the wheel assembly and progresses across underneath a small metal tab and into our shoe assembly. And we want the topmost portion seated in the wheel cylinder. And that should be able to move around fairly loosely. Back to my new parts, I'm going to take each of the caps and snap those into the spring. And we'll slide that pin through the hole. We can then press on that spring assembly. and rotating it 90 degrees will lock that in. And we can then add our spring for the next shoe. And we'll work that in place. And we'll work that around and get the top lined up as well. And we can add our next pin and our next spring. So our goal at this point is to make sure our brake shoe stays connected with the wheel cylinder. We want our adjuster to fit in with the teeth, and we want our blue spring to be connected with the irregular shaped hole. We should be able to slide them back and forth as well as pull them out just a little bit. And you want to double check that the adjuster is sitting on the outside of the star wheel and that it is not locked in there or pinched in any way. After that, we can clean the inside of our new drum. Additionally, prior to installing the drum, we want to clean off the center hub with Amsoil brake and parts cleaner and a wire brush. And then we will coat this center hub with Amsoil heavy duty metal protector. This will put a film on there that will prevent rust and corrosion in the future. We do have 2 adjustment holes. We want to line up our new drum with one of these adjustment holes so that we can adjust that star wheel if necessary. Now at this point, we want to set the brakes. We are going to be adjusting that star wheel, rotating it freely, adjusting the star wheel, rotating it freely. We're going to follow this sequence until we can rotate the drum about 1 to 1.5 turns when we spin it. And the goal is that 1 to 1.5 rotations, and there should be a just slight drag on the brake pads. And because I replaced that wheel cylinder, I'm going to gently press on the brakes to set that. And additionally, I will bleed the brakes prior to test driving this.